Hey everyone, it's good to be back. This show is going to release every other week for a while. It's a pace I feel comfortable with right now. And as you've probably noticed from the lack of music, we're starting this episode a little differently, just so we have a moment to catch up, because the last new episode of the podcast, barring our annual Boxing Day movie swap with our friend Jay Shapiro, released nearly 3 months ago on October 15th. It honestly doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was, and I needed it. I talked about this a bit back in December, so I won't rehash it, but I had been burnt out for a while, and it took some time for me to actually realize how burnt out I was. Not with the podcast specifically, it was more of a general, I have overextended myself kind of vibe that I didn't really notice until it was all-consuming. Like the thermostat slowly going up, and all of a sudden, you're wondering why you're drenched in sweat in your living room. And what I love about this podcast, what I have loved about it from day one, is that I conceived of it in part as almost an act of service for myself. And so me getting sort of generally burnt out with life was bleeding into this really good thing I have going, this pure thing that I love. And it was making me, slowly, not like doing it. Or at least that's what I thought. In reality, I just needed some time off, needed to rest, needed to go to therapy, sort myself out, that sort of thing. And a tipping point for me realizing that I needed some time for myself, that I deserved it, that I wasn't some podcast failure, was interviewing the wonderfully talented and exceptionally gracious Danny Miranda. He is, among other things, the host of the Danny Miranda podcast, where he interviews some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs and thought leaders with deeply researched, thoughtful, intentional questions. These conversations regularly reached between tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, and in less than 4 years, he'd recorded over 460 episodes. And then, in May of last year, he chose to step away. We recorded this conversation in late October, nearly 6 months after that decision. Since he and I spoke, he has restarted his podcast. But it was a privilege to speak with him in that moment, in that liminal space. We spoke about many things. The tension between wanting to be of service to others while struggling with your own feelings of self-worth, the idea of truth being a daily commitment we make to ourselves, and how, quote, you're always 30 days away from the person you want to be, end quote. One of the things I love about Danny is that he's able to be very vulnerable very quickly. He engages honestly and authentically. That's rare. And hearing him describe his journey, his decision to step away from something he'd poured thousands of hours of his life into, inspired me to do the same. I am grateful to Danny. And I am grateful for this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Danny, thanks so much for joining us.
It is an absolute pleasure.
Well, I'm glad that it's a mutual one. On your show, the Danny Miranda podcast, you've interviewed entrepreneurs like Gary Vaynerchuk, also known as Gary V, Alex Hormozi, popular YouTubers Colin and Samir, podcaster Chris Williamson, author Robert Greene, and the man trying to live forever, Brian Johnson. And that's just to name a few. And this is an impressive, if unsurprising, lineup, considering you were taking pretty big swings as early as 2011, when as a 15-year-old, you were tweeting at Gary Vee to convince your mom to let you go to his New York City book signing, which, for our listeners, he did by calling her directly. From the About page of the website you had at 13 years old, you wrote, quote, I live by the motto, if you are too young to do something, don't worry, soon you'll be too old, end quote. That was 2009. It's now 2024. You turned 29 this past July. My first question, Danny, is what do you think about that motto now?
Sounds about right. Yeah, it's interesting. I got an astrology reading yesterday that brought tears to my eyes because the guy mentioned, he said, at 13 years old is when your ambition really started. And I was like, dude, I started a blog on how to help people be happier when I was 13. How do you know that? And so, yeah, I feel very much like I'm just coming home and have been coming home to the things that I already knew. I experienced the world as a quote unquote normal person from the ages of 16 or 17 to the age of 24. And I really think that was a really important time to shape me and to go into different things that I wouldn't have gone into if I had continued blogging from 13 onward. But yeah, the mission of my life is to help people live better lives. And so often we use age as an excuse for a reason why we can't live a better life. And at 13 years old, I knew that was nonsense. And at 29 years old, I know that's nonsense as well. But I do remember being 22 or 23 and using that as an excuse for why I couldn't do things.
Mm.
So it's interesting seeing the difference of different ages. And yeah, I know that to be true for sure, that age does not impact what you can and can't do.
I want to hone in on something you just said. This is something that I've struggled with as well. We can know the truth of a thing, right? Like we can know that you're never too young or too old to start something. We can know the truth of a story that we tell ourselves, and yet so often we don't believe it to be true. Why do you think that is?
I think a lot is dependent on your current emotional state and how you feel about yourself currently. So I think that how we feel about ourselves is based on a bunch of different things. One is, what have we done in the past? Another is, what about the last month? What have we give an extraordinary percentage of our self-worth to our last month. And if we have been not working out or not doing the things that are good for us, not meditating, not reading, not talking to friends, if I do all of those nots for a month straight, I will not think very highly of myself. But I'll know that I was this person at 13. I'll know I was this person with the podcast. I'll know that I ran marathons, all these things. It doesn't matter if for 30 days straight, I don't do the things that I know are good for me. So that's something I think to keep in mind is you're always 30 days away from the person that you want to be because there's so much weight we put on the last 30 days. It's disproportionate. That can be used for you and that can be used against you. I think you sometimes know truths, but don't act on them.
The power of 30 days. For 30 days this summer, the first thing in the morning and last thing at night, you looked at yourself in the mirror and said aloud a list of positive affirmations to yourself, beginning with, quote, I, Danny Miranda, am a person of integrity with a good attitude and specific goals, end quote. Talk to me about Zig Ziglar.
Yeah, I actually haven't dove too deep into Zig Ziglar stuff in general, but this list of affirmations just came on my radar in some way. Don't even remember how. And I tweeted that out. I said, what would happen if I did this every day for 30 days straight? And I did. And it was a wonderful experience. And it definitely shaped the person that I was in August. And so for me, I knew all of the things that I was reading in Zig Ziglar's affirmations were true about me. And that I could have evidence for them being true in the past. And so even though I wasn't living as that way in June of 2024, I could still see the evidence for them being true in previous seasons of my life. And so those affirmations allowed me to hone in on my truth and allowed me to hone in on the fact that what I was reading was actually true. And it helped change my behavior in a positive direction.
I don't know if you have any experience with cognitive behavioral therapy, but I did CBT for many years when I was probably in the deepest part of my depression from like 2014 to 2016. And one of the things that I found very helpful, because I guess on a natural level, I'm sort of resistant to things that sound like a little woo-ish, but this exercise that was very helpful for me, and I'm thinking of it now because it's sort of similar. It's about acknowledging the proof that's in front of you. We had this worksheet and the therapist told me whenever you're struggling with a hot thought, that's basically like a thought in your head that is negative and untrue and a lie, but is like, you can't get it out. It was to take this worksheet out and make 2 columns. The column on the left was, what's everything that proves that the thought, the lie in your head is true? And what's everything that proves that the thought, the lie in your head is false? And you just wrote as much evidence. You were like in court and you were the prosecutor and the defender and you gave both sides, the best due you could give it. And the whole point of it wasn't that necessarily you could disprove every lie in your head that day, but it was importantly to show that for every hot thought in your head, for every lie that you're telling yourself, there is also disproving evidence. And I found that incredibly powerful. And there's something about that, right, Danny? There's something about just like having proof in front of you that shows like, oh no, I am worthwhile. Like I am a decent human being. I am deserving of more, that can be really helpful.
I love that. That's a really useful example. And it reminds me of Byron Katie's Loving What Is book and her practice called The Work, which I listened to over and over and over again in June of this year, May or June, just Loving What Is, the audiobook. And I found it really helpful to just put more space between what is true and what were fabrications that I think we can so often get invested in when we are in a particularly dark period of our life.
Yeah. And I do want to get to that point, May of this year.
Yes.
But before we do, I want to give our listeners a little more context. There's a quote that stuck with me about your childhood. You said, quote, "I was very blessed. I had an incredible childhood. My parents love me. My parents are still together to this day. They're 29 years going strong. My grandpa and my grandma played pivotal roles in my life. I would spend a lot of time with them," end quote. Sounds a lot like my childhood. And yet something was nagging at you. Quote, "I always felt average in every sense of the word. I always felt like I was the median. I was the midpoint for everything," end quote. You kept asking yourself specifically, wasn't I meant for more? And I know you meditate often daily, often more than once a day. You do a lot of inner work. So I feel comfortable asking you this question. What is the root of that feeling? What's the root of feeling average? Like that kind of judgment of oneself at that young of an age?
The root of feeling average was likely something along the lines of, I don't want to waste my life and I don't want to be a waste. I've been given this great head start in life. And am I going to waste my life? Am I going to waste my talents by just being average? That was the fear, I think.
Yeah, I think that that's a common thread among ambitious people. The self-doubt and self-judgment acts as an agitator for action and for change. That desire for more, the belief that you must be meant for more. And that feeling isn't necessarily universal. Where do you think that came from?
My astrology chart. That's what the guy told me yesterday.
Little 12-year-old Danny with the astrology chart.
It's like, I love how you said, I'm potentially averse to things that are woo, and I'm bringing an astrology chart to the first seconds of this podcast. Beautiful. Perfect. Where does it come from? I think I just saw what greatness looked like with my parents. I saw what greatness looked like with my grandparents and my family. And everyone in my family has this sense of like, we want each other to be better and we want to love each other and improve on each other. And I think as a young person, you have this feeling of, I don't want to just do what my grandparents, I don't want to just do what my family is doing. I want to do better than that, right? And I think we all have this natural inclination to build on what came before us. And I saw greatness so clearly that I didn't want to waste that.
When you say you saw greatness in your parents and your grandparents, define that for me.
My grandpa has made a lot of money in his lifetime. And I was talking to him on the phone yesterday for his birthday. And he's telling me about some stock that he's selling or whatever. And I said, I hope it works out. And he said to me, it doesn't really matter if it works out or not. What matters is that you're happy. What matters is that all of my grandchildren are at peace and living a life that is in alignment with the person they want to be. What matters is the love that I have for you. That to me is greatness. He won in the material world. He won in the physical world, but he actually won with the people in his life that are closest to him still love him and want the best for him. And he wants the best for them. And that to me was like an incredible example of what it means to be a great father, a great grandfather. And I saw that in my mom. I saw that in my dad. I saw that in my grandmother. It's like they understood that money's important and your physical health is important. But ultimately, this is about love. This is about loving one another and going deep on that. And so that to me is greatness. And I witnessed that and I got to experience that. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity. And I wish that I can share that as widely and as deeply as I possibly can to more humans, because it's easy for somebody to listen to this, be like, I wish I got that. And the answer to that is not, I understand that, but it's, you can create that as well. And you could be the first person. You could be my grandfather in that situation, where he himself in the 1940s came from a divorced household, which was incredibly rare. So he was the one who created this incredible picture, and you can be the person creating this incredible picture. You can be great as well.
Yeah, my mom was a child of divorce in the 60s, and my dad came from a very chaotic childhood situation. And yet they have been the best, most caring parents for my sister and I. And as a child, perhaps because I had it so good, and also as a child, your world is a little bit small, at least mine was. Like, what I knew was what I was immediately exposed to, like my family, my extended family, my small little town. And I didn't really understand what a blessed life I had, what a comparatively rare life I had, you know, being surrounded by people who loved and cared for me and nurtured me until I got older. I can't remember exactly what the time was. It was probably sometime in my late teens, early 20s where I first started to appreciate it. Did you have a moment like that?
Yeah, I remember there were specific moments. In fourth grade, I was talking to a girl and telling her that my family was building a pool in our backyard.
Pretty cool thing to tell people at that age.
And I remember her face, and I remember just the feeling of like, that's not normal. Right? And I think in that moment, I started to build some shame around this. Of like, wow, what I have is not normal. What does that mean? And then I remember taking my friends over to my grandparents' house and them just being in absolute awe of like, what the actual bleep? Like, what is this? How is this happening? What is this real? Like, what is going on? And so there were moments where it was like, oh, not everyone gets to experience this. Not everyone gets these blessings. And there were just an immense appreciation for that. And also, like I mentioned, some shame of like, I didn't do anything to deserve this. Like, what? I just showed up here and this is my life. So there was a mix of both, a genuine appreciation and love. And also, how do I deal with this? How do I navigate life through this with this amount of blessings?
There is something interesting there. The idea of feeling shame around something you didn't yourself earn that I think is kind of rooted in something you said a little earlier, Danny, which is that like a feeling of, and I know this feeling too, of I don't deserve this.
Yeah.
The feeling of unearned something, right? Which is natural. But I feel like for some people, perhaps you and I included, the feeling that can kind of gnaw at you is the feeling of, oh, I don't deserve what I have. And that's something different.
Yeah. It's been a cool journey to understand that just because I showed up here without, and then I go back to like, did I choose this? Did I choose this before I got here? I genuinely believe I do. And I did. And I genuinely believe that I have lived a lot of lifetimes and learned a lot of lessons. And my mom and I would joke growing up is like, what did we do to deserve this life? What happened in our previous lives? And this is before I was fully woo and like fully, but it was just natural to us to ask that question. And I do believe that what we do in this life impacts what happens in the next one. So yeah, coming to terms with that, greater understanding. Many Lives, Many Masters is a great book on this topic from two people who didn't believe in reincarnation at all. And they just come to understand it by virtue of hypnosis in a therapist-like setting. Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss, I believe. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, I should probably take a moment to say, because I can realize now, I grew up religious, grew up Christian, and fell away from my faith in my early 20s. And I went through like a very angry atheist phase, right? And over the last, 10 some odd years, I've really mellowed out. And I've understood that even if I don't believe it myself, there is a place for religion, there is a place for belief. And it can bring a lot of meaning and guidance and significance to people's lives. And I realize now, the offhanded comment I made about the woo was really more about my own self-judgment around the topic. And I guess what I'm saying here is I didn't mean it in any sort of way that meant to disrespect your journey with those beliefs, if that makes sense.
I didn't and don't feel disrespected at all.
Oh, good. Just wanted to make sure, because I know how important it's been in your life.
And what I think is an important distinction is I don't consider myself religious at all, but I do consider myself very spiritual. And spiritual is something that we all have and that we all understand that there's an intuitive understanding for me that we are not this body. And there's an intuitive understanding that I am connected to something greater. And this is not something I would have said 2 years ago. I wasn't raised with this idea. It's just one that has become so clear that it's become undeniable. And I've just had so many proof points of it that it's hard for me to unsee it. And it's why I talk about it so much. My parents are like, why are you talking so much about God? Like they're not religious people. They're not spiritual people. And I just said, this is the truth of my experience. And I'm not trying to convince anyone. I'm trying to share my experience.
On that, you said that truth is a daily commitment. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. I found that the more that I've told the truth, the closer I've got to God. And truth as a daily commitment means there are feelings that we have that if we don't honor, if we don't share, if we're not open with, new ones will arise every day. And new ones may arise at every moment or every conversation. And the more that we hide, the more we are not living in truth. And the more we are living further from God. That's been my experience. And yeah, it's a daily commitment because new situations arise that will test you in new ways.
Let's dip back into the stream of your biography here. So when you were 12 years old, you were on a Little League team and you had this blog where you'd write the recaps of every game of what happened, who did what. And you noticed how much joy it brought, not just to the players, to your fellow 12-year-olds, but also the parents. You said about that, quote, if I could appreciate them and they could see themselves as I saw them, that made it all worth it, end quote. And that has been a theme, looping back to something you said earlier about being of service, being of value, bringing value to people's lives. Is there a direct line between that 12-year-old Little League blog and why you started the podcast?
Totally. At the heart of everything I do is I appreciate myself. And when I appreciate myself, I also want to appreciate others. And when I appreciate others, it makes others feel good and it makes me feel good. And a podcast is just appreciating someone. And especially how you and I do this podcast, like you're appreciating me in this moment, you're really saying, okay, Danny, I value the life that you've lived and the life that you are living. And I want to highlight specific things from that life to hopefully help you understand yourself a little bit better and just to let you know that I care about you. That is what I was doing at 12 years old. That's what you're doing right now. That's what I did on my podcast. And that's what I attempt to do every day. And I really do see the divinity in people. I really do see the incredible, awe-inspiring that there's a person, there's a spirit behind those eyes that is doing things in their unique way. Nobody could do this specific podcast, just like you've done it, right? And that to me is so special, that your awareness created specific things that you latched onto about my life that you said, you know what? I want to highlight that. And I want to highlight that quote in that situation. That is awesome. And I love that. And the more that I appreciate myself, the more that I appreciate others, the better my life becomes. It just becomes a real reverence of the people that I see and the situations that I encounter. So yeah, man, absolutely. Very true that the 12-year-old has led to the present day version.
Have you ever worked in the service industry like a barista or a waiter or anything like that?
I was a hotel front desk person.
Hotel front desk. Okay. So I think you're going to connect to what I'm about to say. I was a barista at Starbucks the summer after my senior year of high school, right before I started college. And it was fun. It was a nice summer job, easy enough. I probably put on a little too much weight from all the frappuccinos I was drinking. But one of the things that stood out about that experience, and it was echoed again when I was server at TGI Fridays in the summers between my different college years. And it's that feeling like you're not being treated as a human being. You're being treated as whatever function you are serving at that point. So I wasn't a human being to a lot of the people who were talking to me. I was just the barista who was making their coffee or ringing them up at the register. And that feeling of a loss of humanity, of a disconnection of, oh, they don't actually see me as like a full human. They see me as a means to get what they want, a means to get their grande triple shot, one pump vanilla latte. I was just the means to get to that, or I was the means to get to their, Jack Daniel's potato skins. And those experiences really stuck with me. And it's like a small thing. And I have a sense that you do this, Danny, where now when I go to a coffee shop, like I always make it a point to like ask the barista a specific question, or like ask them how they're doing, or like something to snap them and me out of that feeling that I am the hero of my movie and everyone else around me is a background actor. I'm the star. And wow, it's so cool how there's all these extras walking around me. Because working in like the service industry where you feel like the background actor in someone else's life can really make you realize, oh, wow, I don't like how that feels when someone devalues me, and I don't want to pass that energy on to other people.
Yeah, I'm so happy you shared that, because it really brought me back to the moments where you were connected when I was a front desk person and someone actually did see me as not just a front desk. It really stood out.
You remember those moments.
Yeah, I do. And you're right. I do everything in my power to help see people as people. Last night at dinner, I had a server and I asked him, if I pray for you, what should I pray for? And Kevin said, health, wealth, and success. And I was just like, that little moment, let him know, I see you as a human being that has your own dreams and your own aspirations, and you care about your life. And it's like, I love the example of you are the main character in someone else's movie. And I think that is the measure of a great life, is how can you make other people the main character?
There's a type of person who is very good at being of service to other people and of making other people feel valued and valuable. But still, I don't know, perhaps a little ironically, that's the human condition, they struggle with giving that same thing to themselves. I haven't read everything that Jordan Peterson has written, but there was something that he said that really stuck out to me. He said, treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. And sorry, I didn't expect myself to have that reaction, but there is, that disconnect, right? And I know you've struggled with this, which is sometimes thinking of yourself the same way that you'd think of someone else and treating yourself accordingly can be tough.
What arose for you there, Michael?
I think what just kind of came up there, it's the same. I mean, it's the same thing that attracted me to your story. If you were just, quote unquote, doing a podcast about inspiring people or motivating people, I don't think that would have pulled me in. You've seen the landscape. Those can be a dime a dozen, right? I think what really looped me into your work, I saw in it something that I often struggle with myself. One through line of your work, aside from wanting to be of service to other people, is like you are incredibly vulnerable about your own struggles. And something that you have struggled with a lot, which I have as well, is self-doubt, depression, negative thoughts, feelings of self-worth. And this podcast episode is not about me, but I think whenever I think about those times when I was in my darkest point, which was like 2013 to 2020 or so, I just think of that younger man who I wish I could go back, put a hand on his shoulder and tell him everything's going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know that there are moments in your life where I'm sure you wish you could do the same thing.
Yeah. And what was so interesting about those moments is I was telling myself that like there was an undercurrent of knowing that this is serving a purpose. Throughout every depression that I've mentioned, it's like I knew that I was supposed to be experiencing this so that it would serve in some way. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, I didn't know what context often, but I really did feel, yeah, I'm going through it right now. And also I'm supposed to be, and it's going to be okay. And I will be okay. And I know that this serves a purpose. And I don't want to feel this way right now. Why do I feel this way? And I'm good. Like I know there's the deeper knowing of this is, you'll be okay and this serves a purpose. Did you experience that?
In the moment, no. When it was really dark, when it was suicidal ideation and just wondering what every day was for, in those moments, there was just nothing but darkness. Darkness that I would cover up for other people. I could put a nice smiley face on when I was out socializing, which is why I don't want to make assumptions. But if you've been there, that idea of when you're not at that place where you can share with people, or you don't want to feel like a burden to others by telling them about how sad you are for day 130, you just kind of put a face on. And then, months later, they'll be like, I had no idea anything was wrong. And you think, yeah, well, that was intentional because I didn't want to be a burden to you, which is a self-judgment. But in those moments, yeah, I couldn't see it. And I guess my question to you, Danny, is like, so that was always there, even 2015, 2018, doing the whole frat party thing.
So that was masked up, right? In 2015, 2018, I remember being like, I know this isn't my highest version. I know that for sure. And this is serving a purpose. It wasn't like I was feeling depressed every day.
Right.
It was like, I'm enjoying this time with my friends, and this is my opportunity to get the fun out of my system, is how I was phrasing it at that time. And I knew that it was serving a purpose, because I remember checking in with myself at that time, like, do I want to keep doing this? And the answer was yes, I do. And so it was in some way a conscious decision to go into the darkness.
It was serving a purpose, even if it wasn't your purpose.
Correct. And I can see that clearly now.
Yeah. Okay. There was something you said. It was the episode you did with Andy Frisella. Quote, September 15th, 2019, I had just quit a job that was paying me $10,000 a month. I could do it from anywhere. I was living in San Diego. Life was great, except I hated my life. And the reason why I hated it was the job was easy. It wasn't in line with what I actually care about. And I knew I needed to change something, end quote. I really want you to talk to me about 75 Hard and what that program means to you.
Yeah. I just got transported back to the La Jolla Library in San Diego. A beautiful place by the Cove that is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And I remember writing that email 5 years ago around this time. And, admitting the truth of my situation, because like you mentioned, it's easy to put on a face like it's all good, everything's fine, I'm good, I'm living this life, it's amazing. But then writing that email to Tej opened something up in me. And it opened up the truth, right? That's why it's a daily commitment. It's like it opened up, this is the truth of your life. You actually don't enjoy this thing that other people would enjoy, and the thing that other people could say is amazing. You don't enjoy it. That's the truth of it. And that was the first time that I really admitted it to that level to someone. And then within a week or 2 weeks, immediately after admitting the truth, I then made a change and said, I didn't even wait for his reply. I just quit the job immediately. And the day I quit the job, or the day after, or in the next week or two, I found this program online that I knew would be helpful to me in some way. I don't know how I found it. I don't know why I found it. It just was supposed to be. And it's a 75-day program where for 75 days straight, you take a progress photo, you do 2 workouts. One of them has to be outside. You read 10 pages of a nonfiction book. You follow a diet, no alcohol or cheat meals, and you drink 1 gallon of water. And you do that every day for 75 days straight. The first day I did it, and I was super excited about it. And I told my friend Tej about this program. He was like, dude, I'm going to do it too. And we're going to text each other at the end of every day to ensure that we completed our tasks. And I was like, that sounds great. Let's do it. And so I noticed that in the first half of the program, I was doing the tasks because I didn't want to let him down. And in the second half of the program, I was doing the tasks because I didn't want to let myself down, which speaks to the 1 month theory that we were talking about to start this podcast, where my self-worth had been built up because I was just doing what I said I was going to do over and over and over again. And as this is going on, I'm starting to meditate for the first time as well. And I'm really sensing my life transform in front of my eyes and get into more alignment. I'm noticing how there's just wild situations that are going on that previously were never going on. Like I wanted to become a personal trainer, and I go to the gym across the street from me. And the owner of that place also happens to be doing 75 Hard. 75 Hard is this random program that was started in the year that I started it. It's like, it was not a popular fitness program that everyone was doing that was all over social media. This was just a thing that I decided to do. And now I'm going to this gym and the owner is doing the same program. I say, oh my God. So I witnessed life start to move differently around me. And I started to do yoga for the first time as well. I started reading A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, which blew my mind and helped me see a completely different side to reality. Yeah, I just became a different person the first time I did it. And every time in my life where I've noticed I need a tune-up, I need to get back to homeostasis, I do the program as a way to center myself. And it's played a role in this year as well. And, to go from last year interviewing Andy Frisella on my podcast to this year being a guest on Andy Frisella's podcast.
Very cool.
Just was a whole situation of what is happening. Someone tell me what, doc, who's there? Like something is happening in this guy's life. Like I remember telling my mom that I was going on his podcast and just tears in her eyes and just so much appreciation and gratitude. So yeah, very special program, very special man, very special journey, and very grateful to have those 5 daily commitments available for me to it's there anytime I want it, to just tune myself up.
Quote, I saw my life transform day by day, brick by brick, and by the middle of the program, I'm a completely different human being. I knew that I was becoming a different person. I was becoming somebody who could do what they said they were going to do and finish what they started, end quote. I feel like there's a theme that I've noticed. I don't know if this is a perfect analogy, but there's a horse and a cart. And it feels like whether it's 75 Hard or your 100 days of videos, which we'll get to in a moment, or your acts of meditation, or the Godspeed Run Club, which we can also talk about in a bit. Not a perfect analogy here, but it feels like you're a cart and you find horses that you can lock to your cart that pull you first where you want to go. The act of doing the 75 Hard is the thing that can get you to the thing. Like if I just have a dedication that I can do every single day, I will change. And repeatedly, again, whatever it might be in your life, like it feels like you found a real power in committing yourself to the thing, and then that thing changes you. It's clear that you recognize the power in that.
Yes, it's very important for me, for sure. And I know it's probably important for many people's lives, but I can see so clearly how it shifted me. And it's opened up a whole new reality because I've attached myself to this horse. And it's really special to witness. And, my new friend, Roberto, he said, in the United States, we ask people, what do you do? What do you do for a living? Like as the general question. And in Spanish, what they ask is, what are you dedicated to? And that has an entirely different flavor than what do you do? What are you dedicated to? And I've seen my life, I've been dedicated to the podcast. I've been dedicated to 75 Hard. I've been dedicated to daily meditation. I've been dedicated to now writing a book. And the dedications are really different chapters and different seasons. And sometimes they're intertwined. And I can see that what I'm dedicated to is impacting my life so strongly.
Yes. Well, and importantly, I think it's easier for people to see what they perceive as their flaws or where they need to do work. But I think what can be an obstacle for people is, well, I'm overweight and I know I need to get thin, but I'm not thin. Or I know I'm not as motivated as I want to be and I want to be motivated, but I'm not motivated. And something really powerful about how you talk about these things is, I know I'm not where I need to be right now. And I'm not exactly even sure how I'm going to get there, but I know that if I do this thing, perhaps seemingly unrelated, right? Like you can't necessarily draw a straight line between doing 75 Hard every single day, exercising twice a day, once outside, once inside, how that is necessarily going to make someone better or more motivated, etc. But I think you've understood the key of, let's leave that larger goal aside. Let's set that aside, understanding that on this journey, it will probably give me the tools to become what I want to become.
That's right. It narrows my focus in a way that is very helpful for me when I see so much. There's so much I could do. I could do this. I could do weightlifting. I could do running. I could do podcasting. I could do writing a book. There's so much. It's like, okay, but in this moment, in this season, what are we dedicated to? What are we putting ourselves into? Can we make this a challenge in some way that can be helpful and useful to us to help us transform ourselves into the person that we want to be?
I want to briefly talk about the first guest and, I don't know, at least for now, the last guest of your podcast.
Yeah.
Tell me about what Tej means to you.
Yeah. I touched on it briefly when, he texted me saying, let's do 75 hard and keep each other accountable. This is a friendship with a guy who I saw in 2018 on Twitter. And I just read his tweets and I said, there's something different about this guy. I don't know what it is. I don't know why he's tweeting in the way he is, but there's something that is different. And I know now for sure that he was tweeting with love. He was tweeting with compassion for people. He was really tweeting with understanding and empathy and just wanting the best for others at the deepest level. I was attracted to that, as we all are attracted to people who are living in love and people who want to love us. That's just a natural thing that brings us closer to them. And I just remember reading his tweets, wondering what it was, and then trying and finding ways to get closer to him in the sense of looking at the things that he was doing and looking at the way in which he was approaching life. And what he means to me is just somebody who is, one, an incredible friend. Two, is somebody who has an incredible amount of wisdom. Like, you go to this guy with anything and he will have an answer. He will have a way out, a way forward. He is just a remarkable human being. I met him for the first time in April of 2024, this year, after being friends with him for 5 years or 6 years on the internet. And it was like we had known each other for lifetimes. That's the best way I could describe it. And it was just this immediate sense of recognition of, this is myself. I mean, he came to the retreat. He was in awe of what I created. And I was like, dude, without you, this doesn't happen. Like, you created this. And so just immense amount of love for him and gratitude and appreciation. And I'm so excited to see him next month. So that'll be great, and feeling very appreciative for him as a human being.
Quote, the reason I started the podcast was I started having amazing phone conversations all around the world with people I wanted to learn from and people I was excited by, end quote. So we've talked about how throughout your life you've wanted to be of service to others, whether it's the Little League blog you had at 12 or the coaching you do today, the men's retreat. But what was it about specifically in the summer of 2020 when you were having long phone conversations with Tej and others that made you realize, oh, one way I can be of service is with this podcast?
In order to be of service to others, you often need to be in service to yourself. And I recognized that I was serving myself by having these conversations on the phone. And I was really finding so much joy from learning about myself, learning about others, asking people questions, having them ask questions to me. I was enjoying that process so much. And then I realized, okay, if I'm enjoying that process, then I can be in a place of service to others because I'm enjoying it. And so they can enjoy that experience too. So it was just a sense of, I love this. I never thought of myself as a podcaster. I mean, I remember in 2018, 2019, when I was working this job that I didn't like, how I would procrastinate the time by listening to Tim Ferriss and listening to Joe Rogan. And I can see clearly now those procrastinations were actually what my heart was longing for. I was longing to be as comfortable in my own skin as Joe Rogan was. I was longing to ask questions that made people think like Tim Ferriss does. And those longings were just waiting to be manifested into reality in 2020, or to start the process in 2020. And I just saw it so clearly how I wanted to connect with people and to learn and to be understood and to understand. Yeah, it was just an immediate sense of, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I mean, I pressed record on the first one and finished the first one and said, oh, wow, this feels different than anything I've done in the past. This feels different than writing. And I love writing. So, wow, this is going to be something interesting. Within 30 days, I had recorded 20 episodes.
That's insane. As someone who podcasts, that is just such an insane amount. I mean, that's so impressive.
Well, I was living at home and I had savings. And so I was just in this place of, I'm going to dedicate myself to this because I love it so much and I can feel other people loving it too. Within the first 20 episodes, people are being like, I've never had a conversation like that, or wow, that was really interesting, or I learned this about myself, and wow, you have a lot of potential at this. So I was getting the feedback from people of like, you're going to be successful at this. And I was feeling I enjoyed this. And so of course I'm going to be successful at it because I already am successful at it.
Yeah, the deep research you do for your guests is, well, I mean, it not only makes an impact on listeners like me, but I mean, some of the things your guests have said about your prep, quote, "This guy's done the most research I've ever seen in my life," end quote. Quote, "I don't remember ever stating that publicly, but that's good research," end quote. Quote, "First of all, great research. Second of all, great question," end quote. That was Amir from the YouTube duo Colin and Amir. Two more. Quote, "God, you're good at this, Danny," end quote. And finally, I think this one is my favorite because it says more than perhaps any of the other quotes. And that is, "It's fun to talk to someone who is listening."
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of meaning there.
Ben Mesrich. Yeah, it's fun to talk to someone who's listening. If you really just sit in that, right? Like,
yeah.
There's so much depth to that statement.
How often do we have conversations where it just feels like the person you're talking to is waiting for their turn to talk?
That's right. And what I've experienced is that the deeper that I listen to myself, the more I can listen to the guest.
Wow. That reminds me of something from Ron Howard that I learned about all the way back in film school. And he said that it's his job as the director to do as much prep as possible, to be as prepared as he can before he steps on set, so that when he steps on set and he gets an idea from an actor or the cinematographer or someone else on his crew, they come to him and they have a question or an idea, something they think will make the scene better, that he's so secure in all the prep that he's done that he can actually hear their idea for what it is. Because if he hadn't prepped as much as he had, he might be too insecure or might be too rigid or think, oh no, we can't do that. That's a diversion. But all the prep he does before he gets to set helps him be secure in actually listening to the idea and then weighing it that day.
That's a beautiful example, because I often thought that the prep that I was doing was just so that I could free flow in the moment and just know what to say in the appropriate time. And really, I've never thought about this specifically, but the prep that I do in my life is the meditation, is the working out, is the having conversations with friends. And when I do those things, I'm preparing in my day-to-day life so that when the podcast happened, I was able to perform the best. And so the prep wasn't just about the other person. The prep was also about myself and bringing my most prepared self to the table so that I could feel good and be good in the moment with the person that I really do want to appreciate to the fullest.
Yeah, you wrote something similar in December of last year, quote, "I don't prepare for the show in the same way I used to. I've realized my superpower is not the research, it's the presence," end quote.
Yeah, that was a whole different journey. Part of it was the feeling that I really wanted the person to like me.
Ooh, I got it. Ooh.
That hits of it.
I could feel you touch my chest with that one.
Yeah. I wanted the other person to like me. And if the person that I appreciate also appreciates me, then I'll be okay. And when I realized that, I was like, I got to stop doing research because it's holding me back from my true freedom, my true expression, my truest essence. And what, I don't think I'm good enough? Of course I think I'm good enough. So why do I need to do this thing? And I do also feel there's some caveat to that because the research is coming from love and loving the other person. But when it bled out into wanting them to like me, that's when I really got honest with myself and really looked at that. So.
Right. It can be hard to disentangle. I've thought about this as well, as like how much of the prep that I'm doing for this podcast is so that other person feels seen, and how much of the prep that I'm doing for this is so that they can see me.
That's right. That's exactly right. I resonate so strongly. Like, I want you to see how good I am at knowing you.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I see you though, Michael. Don't worry.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so this is a question not about the logistics of how you prepare for an interview, the nuts and bolts of how you go about it, because, and I'll link this in the show notes, you cover those details quite well in episode 305 of your podcast, in which you're actually the guest and are interviewed by writer David Perel. This is a question about the engine of your curiosity. What gets you interested in people in the first place?
You know, I have these specific interests that are kind of intrinsic to me, I would say. Business is one, technology is another, emotions and self-understanding is another. But really what I was looking for when I was figuring out who to have on the show is this person living in their truth. Is this person doing this thing because they think it will get some outcome for them? Or are they doing this thing because they enjoyed playing in the sandbox? And if no one saw them play in the sandbox, they would still be doing it. That, I think, was the question that was guiding me, was how much fun is this person having for the sake of doing the thing that they're doing? That's what got me curious.
You said recently, quote, "In this season of my life, I'm less fired up about podcasting than I am about coaching and helping people mentally perform at their peak," end quote. Say more about that.
Yeah, I just noticed that the podcast was a performance in some sense. It was a looking back as well. And you can gain a lot by looking back. It's looking back at your life, at what makes you you, understanding yourself. But I also realized that there were other conversations I was having at the same time that were about looking forward or looking at the present in a more honest way of what is the actual thing that you're scared to admit? What is the actual belief that's holding you back in life, right? These are things that I could touch on in a podcast episode, but that weren't necessarily the focus. And I didn't feel that it was the appropriate place for those conversations to even happen. And it wasn't creating the most truthful outcome. And so I recognized that the depth of the conversations I was having, coaching and doing retreats, were so much more potent, that were creating real changes in a different way that the performative nature of a podcast wasn't. And I was like, okay, I follow my feeling. I follow my feeling to start this thing in the first place. I'll follow my feeling to put this on pause. And I'm sure I'll come back to it at some point as well. But I just felt like, okay, this is just what this season is calling for, because I'm not getting as much energy from recording as I am from having these deep conversations in the closet with somebody about the truth of their experience. So yeah, that's why.
You talk about, I alluded to it earlier, in June, you started this project where you made 100 videos, a video a day for 100 days. And in the 100th video, you were looking back on that first day and you said you were in, quote, "the darkest place in my life." And you can go into as much or as little detail as you want about this. You've talked about it a bit, but I don't want to force you to. But was that moment a catalyst for recognizing that the podcast was not doing for you what it once was?
Yeah, for sure. In that situation, what really made it the darkest period of my life was I was dating a woman who at one point I was convinced was going to be the woman that I spent the rest of my life with. And it wasn't. And it was because when I meditated, I was told that you have to break up with this woman. And I felt the pain of that because I didn't understand why that was coming through as I was meditating. And it didn't make sense to me because the connection we had was so deep and otherworldly and really just magical and special. The whole thing made me question so much. Like, do I not know myself? How could I think this? Why did this happen? Why? I don't understand. And because I felt so like I misunderstood the situation and misunderstood everything, it allowed me to go to this place that really challenged everything I knew and made me start from scratch, is how it felt in the moment. What was your question?
Sometimes a seemingly unrelated event, right? Like I doubt there's necessarily a through line between the relationship you were in and the podcast, since those two things I imagine began at separate times or motivated by different things. Why we get into relationships and why we start personal projects are often two wholly different things. But sometimes one event, seemingly disconnected from another thing, can act as a catalyst for reflection about that other thing.
That's really well put. And that is the truth of it, is if this was ending in my life, this relationship that I thought for sure would continue. Okay, well, I thought this podcast would for sure continue, but let me question that assumption. And that is a really astute observation on your part and definitely related to why I felt comfortable putting it on pause. Because I said, okay, I put this relationship on pause and this relationship is over. And I never thought I would do this. And I also never thought I would stop doing the podcast for a prolonged period of time. And it's okay that this relationship's over. And it's okay that I'm not doing the podcast in this season.
Do you play poker at all?
I did when I was younger, but haven't in a while.
Okay. Yeah, me too. I played a lot in college. I don't play that much. Like my wife and I went to Vegas earlier this year and we played a little bit. She did much better than I did. But when I was in college, I played a lot more. But I'm still familiar with this term called pot committed, which I imagine you're familiar with as well. For our listeners, it's when you're so deep into a game and you've put so much money into the pot, the place where all the players in the game have put their money and their bets as well, that you're waiting for a card. Let's just say in this instance, it's one card to come down on the table. If you're playing Texas Hold'em, you're just waiting for that one card to make your hand. And every time, whether it's the flop, the turn, the river, the first three cards, the fourth card, the fifth card, you're just waiting for that one card that's going to make your hand. And every card that comes out, it's not quite making it. And you're getting this feeling in your head, I know I should fold, but it can be so difficult to fold when you feel, quote unquote, pot committed because you've put so much of your money into the pot. And that term pot committed can apply to so many things in life. And the question here, Danny, is, even before I was prepping for this podcast, I could see just from watching and listening to your podcast how much work you were putting into it. But then when I actually started researching and hear you talk about it and hear about the behind the scenes prep that you were doing, and also just like what this podcast meant and means to you, like I think rough back of the napkin math, you easily invested over 10,000 hours of your life into this show. That can't be easy, even just pausing. Something that has so wholly defined your life, like 3 episodes a week, to just walk away from, even temporarily.
It was very easy. And it was very easy because the podcast meant nothing, not nothing. The podcast meant just a minuscule amount to me compared to the relationship.
Say more about that.
If we go full circle and putting things in their proper place, my grandpa is teaching me from a young age that love is more important than money. My family is teaching that as well. And so if you replace the podcast with money and then you see love, it's like, I value love more than the podcast. I value love more than money. And that's why the relationship ending was way more painful than stopping the podcast.
I want to talk about these 100 videos because I actually feel, perhaps more than anything else I've seen you do, that these videos give me insight into who you really are. Not just because you so often very vulnerably kind of bare your soul directly at camera, often in like not perfectly well lit rooms, like on the selfie camera of your phone, but like the fact that you're being vulnerable in public. The first video you say, quote, when you're going through a really dark period of your life, which I've gone through over the last month, 2 months, it's cool to have some footage from that time period and from the time of coming out of it. And I feel myself coming out of it. I feel it getting better. But I also feel the darkness as well, end quote. And then later you say, quote, in this state that I've been in, I don't want to be seen. I don't want to talk to people, end quote. And yet you're feeling that in the very moment you don't want to be seen, you make the decision to show yourself, not just to your friends and family, but to strangers. Why?
My mom, maybe like a week or two before I started, said to me, you're a really creative person, but you're not creating anything. Do what you can today to just create one thing. That definitely stuck with me. And my mom also said, you're not going to an office every day. And so you're not checking in with people. People aren't seeing you. And you're not even able to put on a fake smile because you're not being seen. So like, what is the equivalent to going into the office every day? For me, it's logging onto the internet and being seen on YouTube. And I said, okay, like I can do that. I really, and I'm good at sticking to my commitments and I'm good at just going into the season of, all right, look, in this season, we're going to do videos. And it was the most vulnerable and most open I really had ever been online. And it was not something that I was able to do a year prior or 2 years prior, where to just talk to a camera for 100 days straight. It was new to me and it was challenging and it was growing me in some way. So I knew that it would lead to growth. I knew that it would force me to do something that I didn't want to do that was ultimately for my benefit and ultimately for the best of not just myself, but other people as well. And it just seemed like the right thing at the right time. And it was an amazing journey that I'm so happy I went on.
I think going from the very high production value, professional lighting and cameras, often in-person conversations with incredibly accomplished, respected people, to recording these selfie videos of yourself from your phone. Many of them, I think there was one day 10 that you recorded in an Airbnb bathroom.
Yes.
That was just a little under 4 minutes long, where you were just letting everyone know what a tough day it was. Like, you took a coaching call, you meditated, you napped, and I think you got like 14,000 steps in. And you're like, that's all. And then you just signed off. And I was just thinking to myself, man, this is the production value equivalent of showing up in a suit every day and then showing up in your underwear and being okay with it.
That's right.
Most people would not be able to do that. And you did that for 100 days. I don't mean to like blast your ego with this, Danny, but I could not do that. And the fact that you decided to, that was just a huge moment for me when I was researching.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And also, I couldn't have done that a year prior. I couldn't have done that 3 years prior or 5 years. Like, this was a progression that got to that point. And I just really wanted to let people know I'm a human being who's going through something, and that's okay. Also, I think about how the podcast was, some element was like, look at me. And this was more like, it was me on a stage in some sense. And this felt more to me of, I'm just a human being and a realer expression of the truth of who I am.
Yeah, that's very well said. Yeah, there's something about, and I totally get this. Like, I've always struggled with self-promotion, but I understand that that's something you have to do in our space. And like, there is something cool about like whether when you go on Twitter or Instagram and you're like, look at this metric, guys. Like, I got this many downloads, or like, look at all these guests I spoke to this week, and like, aren't they impressive? And like the underlying messages. And if they're impressive and they're speaking to me, what does that say about me, guys?
Right.
But when you do, like, all right, day 45, still kind of sad. Yes. Like, there's nothing, any amount of promotion. You can't post that to Twitter and be like, check out my new video, guys. Like, that's stripped away.
Yeah, that's right. That's really it. I don't want to be seen on a pedestal. I don't want to be seen as cool. I just want to be seen as me.
Mm. Was this like 75 hard? This was a horse you were attaching your carriage to?
Yeah, I started doing 75 hard, I think day 11 or 12 of that series, because I was like, I know this could go on for as long as I want it to go on, of this feeling of just being upset, and I need to do something. At this point, I need to get to a place where I am feeling safe within myself and do the things that are good for me. And so I really saw the reflection of day 10 and be like, all right, this is the low point. This is where we start to turn around, because I'm not doing this shit for another 190 days. I don't want to record the same video 90 days in a row.
I want to get your thoughts on a quote from Peter Crone. Life will present you with people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. What does that mean to you, and where right now are you not free?
It's a great question. Life will reveal to you people and circumstances to reveal where you're not free. I love this idea, because it basically says everything you don't like about your life is serving you in some way. And everything you don't like about what you see and the people you see and the situations that surround you is there to guide you to more freedom. And it's been true from every time I felt that. It's been undeniable. So where am I currently not free was the question?
Yeah.
The first place that comes to mind, homeless people. And I grew up in New York, and I grew up, treating homeless people the same way we talked about treating service workers, of just like, that's not a human being. Like, walk past and don't look at them and just continue on. And that was just my norm always. And that's kind of been how I've lived. And then, 3 weeks ago on a bridge in Austin, or 2 weeks, I don't even know what day it is, but I was on a bridge talking to a friend, and a homeless guy comes up to me, shouts, slurs to me, and puts an imaginary gun on my head.
This is with Jack?
This is with my friend Jack Sweeney. And I'm so uncomfortable by this moment that I'm just like, oh my God, make this end, make this end, make this, just like freaking out. And I just turn to him and I say, I love you. And in that moment, the situation completely changes. He walks away and I just was like, what just happened? And I know that I'm not fully free there because I didn't lead with, I love you. I led with fear, which probably created the situation in the first place because he could feel my fear tapped into that and then just manifest that in front of me. And so I know that I have programming around homeless people that I would like to update and I would like to lead with more love and compassion. And that's probably a place that I would like to work on in the coming year.
Every Tuesday, 7 a.m. in Austin, Texas, 4-mile run, followed by a 20-minute meditation and a coffee. Men only. Are you still doing Godspeed Run Club?
Oh yeah, still doing Godspeed Run Club. Last one was a couple days ago.
What is it about being in communion with men specifically? I know that you first joined a run club.
Yes.
And then that led you to start Godspeed Run Club. I want to try and draw something out between how you've dedicated yourself to serve other people, but specifically in this instance, and I've heard you talk about this on other podcasts, but I'd just love for you to speak on it briefly here, specifically about community with men.
Yeah. I had this feeling when I attended my friend Harry and Brett's run club, which was on Tuesday mornings at 7 a.m. I had this feeling, this feels very primal and this feels right to me. It's 20 guys all running together at 7 in the morning. And I just got this sense wash over me of, oh, this is awesome. This is so cool. And I want to do this. And so I attended their run club. And then they said, we don't want to do this run club anymore because we have something on Monday, but do you want to take this over? And I said, of course, like this is amazing. I would love to. And so I started leading it. And what I find is if I really were to think about it, after the age of 22, 23, most men don't have a place where they could go to just be a man. And that is a rare thing. And it was a rare thing in my, prior to having this, I didn't have any place that was just men. We have that in college with fraternities. And I feel it's really important. I feel it's really important because the dynamic changes and shifts when a woman gets involved. And I even saw this so clearly when I just finished a retreat this past weekend and I invited my friend. So there was a goodbye party for my cousin and 10 men show up. And then to the goodbye party, then my friend Talia comes in and she said, wow, I could feel the dynamic shift. And I could also feel it shift when she left, she said. So I find that really interesting that women do just change the dynamic in some way and that's okay. But it's also really nice for men to have a place to just be men.
When you start the podcast back up, I really hope you speak with Richard Greaves. Are you familiar with his work?
No, but that sounds familiar.
He wrote a book called Of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It. And he approaches that topic about why men and boys are falling behind in almost all aspects of Western society. And it comes at it from a very academic background, but also as the father to sons. I feel like just based on what you've said here and what I've seen you talk about this issue, I think like you'd really connect with him and really appreciate his work. Last question. You said recently, quote, I feel that the next thing that is coming through me is a book. It feels that way. It feels like this challenge is ending and a book is being formed, end quote. I'd love for you to just briefly tell us about Tell the Truth.
So the current working title is Tell the Truth. And what I'm doing to develop this book and create it into reality is to just write down the most important lessons from my life and stories associated with them. And I figure if I can just put that on the page, then the book will form itself in some way. And it's kind of how I've done everything. I didn't know the podcast was going to be about talking to people about their emotions or the deepest parts themselves. I just enjoyed having conversations with people. It formed itself. That's really what I attempt to do at the retreat as well. As just, I know that this grouping of people will help form itself. What is supposed to be worked on or healed, or it will form itself through time, through space, through attention, and not trying to force it into any specific thing. So my current process is write down the most important things that you talk about, that people have asked you about, and put it in one resource with the stories that have been paramount in creating these lessons. So that's the current plan. That's what I'm doing. hopefully we'll have a first draft done in the next 6 months. I'm excited to see what will come about from all this and this book that's being born within me.
Danny, I've so enjoyed our conversation, and perhaps as much I've enjoyed getting to know you through this research. I think if I could pull a through line from all the work that I've seen you do, you help other people feel seen, and you show us very publicly, very vulnerably, your own struggle with that very human desire to be seen. And I just want to end with something that you said on day 100 of your 100-day video series. You said, quote, "Nothing's guaranteed. What I do know for sure is that in every moment that I'm living, I'm going to do my best to give as much love as I possibly can to myself and the people around me, and I will let that be my guide," end quote. So Danny, thank you for what you do for others and for yourself. And today, most of all, thank you for your time.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you for highlighting that. Yeah, goosebumps. Really, really appreciate this interview so much because I feel like I learned a lot about myself, and I can see how skilled of a journalist you are, how skilled of a interviewer and researcher. And I'm really grateful to have gotten this opportunity to be on this podcast. And I know that anyone who steps foot in this podcast door is going to leave the conversation feeling that they understand themselves a little more, which is an amazing feat that you have been able to give me. And it speaks to how much you've been able to see yourself and research yourself and understand yourself. Because ultimately, when we look and we can see another, it indicates that we've seen ourselves. So, Michael, much love. Thank you for everything.
I appreciate you, Danny, and I'm grateful for you.